time to get your fix.
Come on down, get your horrible gaming review. 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 Wow.
Hello, my name is Zachariah with Old Man Gaming, and welcome to another horrible game review. Just barely getting this under the wire, but we've got a good one for you today because we're back in the Borderlands here on Old Man Gaming. We love to see it. But before we get into the review, we gotta give you some disclaimers. Number one, the word horrible in the title of this content does not refer to the game or the DLC that I am reviewing, but much more the content itself. I do snap judgment reviews here. I get 5 to 10 hours mostly with the game. I'm just trying to give you an idea if you're going to enjoy it right off the rip or not. That also coupled with the fact that I do not believe I believe video games are one of the most subjective forms of art, means that I don't give scored reviews here. What I do is I will tell you an overview of what the game is, then I will give you the pros and the cons of the game in my point of view, as all reviews are, and then I will tell you whether I will be sticking with the game outside the purposes of this video. Disclaimers out of the way, let's get into it. Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, our newest installment of Borderlands, has released. Is it good? Is it bad? What do I think of it? What does the Old Man Gaming think of it? Well, you know, we have been a Borderlands channel in the past. We've kind of shied away from Borderlands for a while because Borderlands 3 kind of failed us in a lot of ways. The meta was very closed. There was a lot of quality of life things that just never really came to it. A lot of issues that made us walk away from it as players. Tiny Tina, I will say, is a breath of fresh air for the Borderlands series as a whole, especially with a lot of the quality of life things that just needed to be there in the last installment kind of finding its way into this. However, I will say it's only a breath of fresh air. They definitely stopped a little bit shy of making this thing of taking a true risk and making this thing something different in the genre. Plot-wise, this doesn't really take place in the Borderlands, but it takes place inside the Borderlands, inside a game of Tiny Tina's bunkers and badasses. You take the role of a faceless protagonist who has climbed into Tina's cave with two other protagonists. One voiced by Andy Samberg, another voiced by Wanda Sykes. So, you know, the voice talent is coming out for this. And then, of course, Tiny Tina is still voiced by Ashley Birch. Your faceless protagonist has a face in-game, though, as you will create a character within the game of Bunkers and Badasses, and then proceed to go into the game world that Tiny Tina dictates, which means it's pretty freaking insane. All kinds of crazy lights and whatnot. They really lean into the crazy on this one, and it actually kind of benefits the story a little bit. You also have the bad guy voiced by Will Arnett, the Dragon Lord. There's a quick prologue, and then they go into basically character creation. And that's right, this is the first Borderlands with like true top-to-bottom character creation. You start by picking a class, one of 6. Each one of these classes has one skill tree instead of the full 3 from Borderlands 3 and 2. You also have an overdrive slider as well as normal sliders that allow you to just customize the shit out of your character. Size, look, appearance, makeup, scars, and even the voice. Like, there's 6 different voices, and each one of those voices says completely different things instead of versions of the same thing in a different tone. You can also play with the tone of your voice to get a different flavor. Then you pick a background, which I thought was very interesting. And this background gives you starting stats because your character actually has, 5, maybe 6, 5 hero stats that influence your in-game buffs and nerfs. Other than that, it's a Borderlands game through and through, ladies and gentlemen. Basically, you go in, and the straightforwardness is still there. You go to an area, you do the side quests on your way to the main quest, you level up, adding points into your skill tree to min-max it, as well as your abilities. You also have the added tree of the hero points. There's also an added overworld in this, which is very interesting. You'll actually jump back and forth between it. The overworld being like a giant map where your character's like a little big-headed miniature that runs around the map. And you can actually get random encounters. These random encounters, when you go into them, are like ambushes. It's just kind of like one of like 3 or 4 maps that you just get shoved into, and you just have to kill randomly procedurally generated spawning bad guys until the little bar fills up, and then you get some loot and you get out of the random encounter. That's one of the more procedurally generated elements to this. I know that there's also a procedurally generated end game in this. Of course, I have not gotten to the end game because of where I am, but if you like Borderlands, you're going to notice a lot of similarities to it with some added stuff. Again, like I said, this is a breath of fresh air. They're not really breaking the mold on this, which we'll talk about in pros and cons, because I kind of almost felt like they kind of should have. But they definitely added a ton of stuff that we really should have seen in Borderlands 3. So yeah, I mean that's the straightforwardness of this. Your shields, it's the same. It's just all the names are different. Shields are now wards. Class mods are now armor, and your grenades are now spells. Spells are very interesting, though, because they have a cooldown. They're almost like an extra ability that you can kind of find. And the spells are very wide and varied. They don't just... They went crazy with the spell aspects. They're anything from summoning a flaming bird to shooting magic missiles to dropping a meteor on somebody's head. So far, they have been wide and varied and kind of interesting. Okay, well, you know what? That's the straightforward, the long and the short of it. Let's get into the pros and cons. Let's talk about what I liked about this, what I didn't like about this. I mean, let's face it. If you know Tiny Tina, if you know Borderlands, you know what you're in for. But in some ways, you don't. So let's jump into pros. Number 1, quality of life. Quality of life improvements in this game are far. There is tons of stuff in this that Borderlands really needed in the last one. That just it didn't get, and I'm going to list some of them individually. Number 1, you could see your character in the cutscenes. Thank God, man. Why couldn't I ever see my character in the cutscenes? Why was it like I was never ever in the battle in Borderlands 3? Even when you already had voice work and an animated character. You can finally see it in this, and it, like I said, breath of fresh air on that. That's just one of the many small things that has been added to this game that's really improved it as a whole. My next pro is refinement of the class system. Alright, so look, Borderlands is all about the min-max. It's all about the big game. If you're a real into it Borderlands player, that's how it is. Like Philbilly out there, our resident build master general. Now, he hasn't been able to get to the end, obviously, since the game just came out. But when he does, we'll get a little bit better sense of how good that end game is. That being said, I'm going to make an assumption that it's better than 3. And here's why I'm going to make that assumption. Because in 3, you had 4 different character classes, and then, of course, the 5th one, that you could pick from. And those ones actually, those gave you the extra, excuse me, those ones gave you 3 trees that you were locked into, period. And that meant that basically metas emerged very fast, and those were the metas. If you wanted to do the things on high level, you had to play a certain character, and you had to play it a certain way. And that always hurts a game, especially a game like this, where it's not necessarily a games as a service, but it's almost made that way, where it's all about the loot collection and making your character better. You want to be able to do that with any character you want. With this game, by taking away the extra 2 trees, and I know you might think, oh, that's less for each character class, but not only do they take 1 tree away, but they say that later, which I have not gotten to, but later you actually get to pick a second class, a multi-class, so you get 2 trees. If you had said in Borderlands 3, you can't have the 3 trees, but you can pick any 2 trees, that right there would have freed up the meta in a lot of ways, because it opens up all sorts of crazy different combinations. I think that this game will have that build variety. Now, again, this is an assumption. I have not gotten to the end game, nor has Philbilly, so we can't be absolutely positive. And I'm sure there's going to be like one or two builds that are absolutely the end all be all. But we don't care about that. We want all the character classes to be viable in some way, shape, or form. That's what we want. And I think that doing this, that simplifying the character creation and build system process, makes that a little bit more possible. Keeping with that, you also have the hero attributes, which allow you to compensate for whatever you're missing on the skill tree and gives you this extra level of build diversity that might make things really interesting down the road. Basically, you have strength, dexterity, affinity, constitution, wisdom, and intelligence. Each one controls some factor. Strength is how much critical damage you do. Dexterity is your percentage to hit critical chances. Constitution is extra health and warding. Intelligence is spell effect chance. And wisdom is how quickly you return your spells to you. Stuff like this is great because even if you're missing something in the character tree, you can kind of make up for it in the stats. My next pro is the enemy typing, the enemy design. I was blown away by the enemy typing and enemy design in this. Not only do they have really good, rich, funny lines that comes from great writing, which we'll talk about in a second, but they are really interesting to fight, which I felt like was lacking in 3 a little bit. 3 seemed very straightforward. It seemed like 2 with better graphics. Whereas with this, like, right off the bat, you're fighting skeleton archer, you shoot it in the arm and the arm comes off, it will throw its bow at you and then charge. That kind of reactive stuff is just really cool and really interesting to me, and it keeps the game kind of very, very fresh. And that's something I really got the feel from this game. It's amazing in the enemy typing so far that I've seen, and that'll just segue right into the writing. Writing's phenomenal in this so far. Again, it could drop off. I've only played for 5 hours, so keep that within a mind. But Borderlands 3 had a lot of jokes that fell flat in my mind. Like, some of them were funny, but some of them were very old, like farty poop poop jokes, and it just didn't. I don't know. Like, it was fine, but at the same time, Borderlands 3 felt dated out of the gate in a lot of ways. Whereas this one, and I loved Borderlands 3, my review reflected, I thought it was a great game. Still, comparing these two, this game is very snappy on the writing, and I don't know if it's because their subject matter is nerd culture this time with the whole D&D references, but it's snappy, it's quick. I find myself laughing a lot more and more interested in hearing what the characters say instead of just moving through the zone and getting the loot as fast as I can, or getting to the next action scene as fast as I can. I was very much enjoying that part of it, so I've got to give it a pro. Alright, 2 more quick pros, then we'll get into the cons, because there is some stuff that I didn't like about this game. Number 1, melee. We finally get melee, ladies and gentlemen. And right now, I will say, on a whole, it's not doing a ton of damage, but you never know what comes down the down the pipe, especially when you're actually assigning statistics to the melee and how they combat instead of just making it this static thing that doesn't end up that doesn't end up scaling with you very well. So super excited about that. Just the fact that you get to collect melee weapons right off the bat is nice. And they actually have this really cool move that I still haven't quite figured out how to trigger every time, but where a melee weapon will actually have you slide to the enemy, plus melee kind of knocks them back a little bit, which it didn't really do before unless it had an effect. So it's really nice. It actually kind of like helps with combat a little bit more than just before. Whether or not we'll be able to make melee builds is still up in the air depending on what kind of equipment we see. But I really like the improvements to that system already. It's made it fresh and interesting. Again, another quality of life thing that's brought on. And then I've got to, of course, shout out the character creation. I've wanted this in Borderlands forever, and they did it up. I gotta say, for their first time doing a character creator, it's awesome. You can create tons of different creations, tons of different appearances and looks, and the fact that you get to pick your voice, and that voice has their own, like basically their own script for the game, It's just great. I love the character creator. I forced myself not to spend my entire 5 hours in it. Basically, like, it was just so much fun. The background stuff and how that plays with your stats is great. Like, I love it. If anything, I just want more of it because there's only really 5 backgrounds you can pick from. I wish we could have like 10 or something like that. Like, I wish there was almost more options to it, but they really knocked it out of the park. You can create all sorts of crazy stuff, especially with the overdrive slider turned on or off. You can create any type of mystical being you can think of. And then finally, my last pro is going to segue right into the cons, and that is the overworld. I think the overworld is kind of a really interesting, cool way to do like the overworld, like making the overworld map kind of interactive and have you actually run around it. And even solve different little small puzzles in it, gain loot from it, and get random encounters from it. It's a really cool idea. It adds this level of randomness while also adding this kind of interesting new kind of level of exploration to Borderlands that it just hasn't had before. And while there are some irritating misses on the overworld, which we're going to talk about, I like it as a whole. I think it's the biggest risk they took with this game, and I think it paid off. It paid off big. I love the overworld, and it really kept things fresh for this game. So let's get into the cons. Let's get into what I didn't like about this game. So number one, with a bullet, I gotta say, some of the technical stuff. I played on PC, on the Epic Store. I didn't really notice any big frame rate drops or anything. I noticed some other reviewers had. I didn't notice that. However, I have to point out that in our launch stream, and you can go check this out on Twitch, it crashed. It crashed in the first level. Crashed my whole computer. Well, not my whole computer, but it crashed the whole system. It even wanted me to send a bug report. That was a little irritating. And then you also add in the fact that literally every time I go into Epic Store, it asks me if I should allow Borderlands to be able to be played. Why do I need that extra thing every time I go in? But for some reason it does. There's like 6 user agreements you have to sign up for right off the bat. Like, that kind of stuff is really irritating and annoying. I wish there was a better way to do that. When you sign in every time, it optimizes shaders. I mean, it's a couple of seconds, but still, why does it have to optimize the shaders literally every time I go into the game? This is 2022, guys. This is ridiculous. So that's a pro. That's a con for me. But that's easy to look by. Technical stuff like that, it's not enough that it's going to crash your system a lot. It's not enough that it's going to keep you from playing. But let's go into some of the other cons. The biggest con, I think, that me, and I think Phil Billy will echo this from our play, is as cool as the random encounter system is in theory, and the procedural generated moments, I think Borderlands benefits from more of them, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the cons. But at the same time, the random encounters that happen on the map just too frequently. They happen a lot. And the battle is fine, but it gets a little tedious. Like, I like the fighting, I like the action, but we only ever saw like one map, and we were in 4 different random encounters. And from what I hear, there's only ever like 3 random encounter maps, like, period. So right there, your eyes get a little bit tired of that. And while the enemies spawn in and they're random, and you do get some loot from it, that's nice. It just interrupts the flow too much. I definitely liked the idea of random encounters in this game. I think it fits on a whole. It's just maybe they should have turned down the amount of time they pop up. Because if I had been going from one place to another and just a random encounter stopped me and I had to fight through it, that would be really cool. And it'd be like, oh man, I was on the road, but I had to do this now. But the way it happens is you're going from point A to point B, you get a random encounter, and then a random encounter, and then maybe a random encounter, and it's just a little frustrating, just a little bit too often. Still, on a whole, it's a great idea. There's just maybe some more maps to it, and maybe it happened a little bit less would have been the better way to go. That brings me to my final and biggest con. And not everybody's going to agree with this con out there. I don't think Phil Billy would agree with this. I know Neil won't, but I've got to say it. I feel like they missed a chance to really break the Borderlands mold here. They were doing something completely different from any of the games with this whole game inside a game thing. So why didn't they take that extra step and really shoot for the moon? What I'm talking about, sure, let's do a standard storyline with standard voice acting because that makes sense. I get it. You've got paid voice actors. You want to do that. But after that, why don't we do a procedurally generated mode? And I know that there is an end game, the Chamber of Chaos, and that's procedurally generated, which is great. But it's just a dungeon, a procedurally generated dungeon with monsters. That's it. What I would have liked is a procedurally generated overworld and a procedurally generated plot. Nothing overtly complicated, just something that every time I went in, I could do another little story that may be procedurally generated with a couple of procedurally generated side quests. Like, make this game a little bit more about the procedural generation, because games like this always benefit from procedural generation. And they really benefit from like that random, interesting, every time I go in it's different feel. And you get some of that with the huge number of classes, the character creator, stuff like that. But 6 classes and I gotta run the same exact missions over and over again to play all of them, that's a little bit of a bummer. I would have liked something like fresh and new, and I think that while it may not have worked, this was a real chance for Borderlands to step outside themselves, and they took the safer path. But again, on a whole, they did everything they did quality life wise. It was perfect. It really makes this game feel fresh. And if you're a Borderlands fan who felt like they didn't do enough with 3, this is the game for you, because they really do a lot of the stuff that, like, oh man, I didn't like that about 3. It was good, but they didn't do this and they should have. Like, that all happens here. So whether or not I'm going to stick with it, hells to the yeah. I really like this game. I'm probably going to stream it a bit on my Twitch. I know Philbilly is planning on streaming it a bit on our YouTube, and if he gets into it, we're probably going to get some builds, so keep on the lookout for that. But I'm definitely going to keep going. I love the characters. I love the class system and how you can play with that. I love the character creator, and I love the quality of life. Really made it feel like a fresh Borderlands experience when some of them may have gotten a little bit stale. So very excited about this. And if you're a Borderlands fan, I feel like you should definitely go out and check this one out, because this is one that's really going to make you feel like it's going to make you feel that Borderlands nostalgia without making you feel bored of the content that they're giving you, which is a tough thing to do in a 6th game in a series, or no, 5th game in a series. But they did it, and I enjoyed it. So, hope that helped you guys. As usual, you can contact us on Facebook at OldManGamingTH, on Twitter at OldManGaming9. You can join our Discord, links in the description below. Influence us in all of our shows from there. Ladies and gentlemen, as long as you keep watching, keep listening, we'll keep making it. Next week, I'm going to try and get up Kirby Forgotten Lands review. So, be on the lookout for that. And until then, we'll see you guys later.